again. Welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Before we go into tonight's program, I just need to make a couple of I need to mention that starting in July, we will be coming to you on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On Tuesday, it will be at 8 o'clock in the evening, and on Thursday, it will be 6:30 p.m. That is also in the evening, which will work out good, because that way we will be coming to you twice a week instead of once a week, but it will only be for 1 hour each night. Let me also remind you that we will not have, in the first 2 weeks of July, we will not have shows. We will do a rebroadcast of previous shows for 2 weeks, and then we will come back the third week in July and with a new program, and hopefully with a lot more material and coverage of issues that we have been covering here for the last few years. Gaza and the West Bank. You probably heard of those two areas in the last week more than you ever heard of them, and you're probably wondering what in the world is Gaza and what is the West Bank. Well, we're not going to go through that in details to tell you what Gaza and the West Bank, but we will discuss what is happening in the Middle East in the second hour, and we will tackle the problem of what took place in Gaza last week, where Hamas had taken over the power structure there in Gaza, where it is now run by a Hamas army, so to speak. So we will be talking about that. We'll talk about to whose benefit was this, and did Israel have anything to do with it? Did the United States have anything to do with it? Who benefited from it? Who are the winners? Who are the losers? And who played what role in this whole thing? The state of Qatar seems to be a principal player in this game between Hamas, Fatah, United States, and Israel, and we will talk about that in the second hour. I believe you will probably learn more about what exactly went on than you will in probably about this particular problem. But we will tackle that problem, though, in the second hour. In the first hour, ladies and gentlemen, we will be speaking with Professor Marjorie Cohn, professor at Thomas Jefferson School of Law. Professor Cohn became president of the National Lawyers Guild in October 2006. She also was recently recognized as one of San Diego's top attorneys in academics for 2006. She lectures throughout the world on international human rights and United States foreign policy. A news consultant for CBS News and a legal analyst for Court TV. She also provides legal and political commentary on BBC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, NPR, and Pacifica Radio. Co-author of the book Cameras in the Courtroom, Television and the Pursuit of Justice, Professor Cohn has published numerous articles in such journals as Fordham Law Review, Hastings Law Journal, and Virginia Journal of International Law, as well as the National Law Journal. And what we're going to talk to, there's a lot more. I just don't want to keep my guest holding. There's a lot more about Professor Cohn. She has written many articles and spoke about many subjects, and what we're going to talk to her about tonight is exactly what is going on in Guantanamo Bay, and also the main thing, the reason that we invited her is a subject that we tackled a couple of weeks ago, the presidential directive the Homeland Presidential Directive to basically give George Bush dictatorial power in case if something happens, and that something could be anything. We will discuss this with Professor Cohen, and also we will tackle a few issues on the U.S. attorneys, where Alberto Gonzalez, was involved in unfair firing. We'll see. We'll talk about that. But without any further ado, let's go directly to Professor Cohen. Marjorie, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Tell me, I wanted to ask you before we go into anything, you wrote a book called The Cowboy Republic, I believe. The 6 things that George Bush got away with. Can you tell me a little bit about just what were the 6 things very briefly?
Yes, it's 6 ways the Bush gang has defied the law. And I talk about a war of aggression in Iraq, the torture of prisoners in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo and CIA black sites around the world. I talk about war crimes such as Haditha, summary execution, and willful killing, assassinations. The Guantanamo Gulag, which covers the Military Commissions Act and the way the prisoners at Guantanamo have been treated and tortured. And I talk about the spying on Americans and the illegal National Security Agency domestic wiretapping, which violates the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and the Fourth Amendment. And I also talk about Bush's refusal to execute the law, which the Constitution requires him to do, in his signing statements and the unitary executive theory, which I think we're going to talk about today.
Okay. Now, tell me, I mean, we've talked a couple of weeks ago here with another guest about the presidential directive. Is that, I mean, you know, you're a legal expert. Was that legal, what he had done, signing on May 9th, the Homeland Security Presidential Directive?
No, I think it violates the constitutional separation of powers. When the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution, they purposely put 3 separate co-equal branches of government into the Constitution to check and balance each other, so that no one branch would become all-powerful. And of course, that's the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And they were particularly concerned about overreaching by the executive, by the president, in times of war. This National Security and Homeland Security Presidential Directive that Bush signed on May 9th basically would place all government power in his hands in the event of what is called a catastrophic emergency. And that's defined here as any incident, regardless of location, that results in extraordinary levels of mass casualties, damage, or disruption severely affecting the U.S. population, infrastructure, environment, economy, or government function.
So what's extraordinary loss of life? What is that?
Well, it's not just ordinary. It doesn't say ordinary. It says extraordinary levels of mass casualties, damage, destruction.
Okay.
But then the part that I'm focusing on, okay, this could be a terrorist attack. It could be a natural disaster. But it could also, where it says disruption severely affecting the U.S. population, infrastructure, government, that could be a huge anti-war demonstration that shuts down government business for a day or two. So I think that the ramifications of this policy go far beyond a terrorist attack or a natural disaster. But even in the event of a terrorist attack or a natural disaster, there are still 3 branches of government. And what this does is it talks about cooperative effort among the 3 branches, coordinated by the president, as a matter of comity. And comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y, means courtesy. And it also talks about proper respect for the constitutional separation of powers. Who would decide how much respect is proper for those other 2 branches? Well, the president would. And who would help implement it? The vice president, and that's Dick Cheney.
Has this ever happened throughout the history of the United States?
There have been, Clinton and prior presidents have had executive orders and plans in place for terrorist attacks, emergencies, catastrophic events. But I think that this goes beyond, and in my opinion, this is Bush's attempt to take this doctrine of the unitary executive to a higher level. The unitary executive has been around for a while. In fact, Samuel Alito, who is now on the Supreme Court, gave a speech to the Federalist Society in 2000 where he referred to it, and it has been referred to during the Reagan administration and before, but no one has used it to the extent that George Bush has. And
can you define what unitary executive means?
Yes. Unitary executive theory is a radical, ultra-right-wing interpretation of the powers of the presidency. And what it does is they claim that all federal agencies, even those which are constitutionally created by Congress, are under the control of the president. And that means that if Bush didn't like the way the FCC or the Food and Drug Administration or the Environmental Protection Agency or the Federal Reserve Board was functioning, he could just eliminate them. And he signed an executive order saying that every federal agency must have a regulatory policy officer run by a political appointee. And this was widely felt by consumer advocates to be aimed at weakening the Environmental Protection Agency and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, two agencies that Bush does not really have much interest in strengthening. Now, the unitary executive phrase was used by John Yoo, and remember who John Yoo was. He was a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General before he became a professor at Bowles Hall. And John Yoo is the architect of the Patriot Act, the domestic spying, the secret spying program. He had a lot to do with the theory that Bush didn't have to obey the Geneva Conventions, and of course the infamous torture memo is the handiwork of John Yoo. Well, John Yoo wrote a memo to Bush on September 25th, 2001, shortly after the September 11th attack, and he used the term unitary executive. And he said the centralization of authority in the president alone is particularly crucial in matters of national defense, war, and foreign policy, where a unitary executive can evaluate threats, consider policy choices, mobilize national resources with a speed and energy that's far superior to any other branch. 6 weeks later, this phrase, unitary executive, started appearing in Bush's signing statements. And we'll talk about that as well. And as of December of last year, Bush had used the words unitary executive 145 times in his signing statements. Signing statements also go back a ways in our history, but no president, in fact, Bush has used more signing statements than all other prior presidents put together. And what he does, the Constitution gives the president two options when Congress passes a law. The president can veto it or he can sign it. There's no other option. He doesn't have a line item veto. He can't object to part of it. And so what Bush did, with two exceptions, one was the stem cell research bill and the other was the Iraq funding bill when the Congress was trying to attach a timetable to get out of Iraq. He vetoed those two. But other than that, he has signed every bill. And yet he attaches what are called signing statements, which is a little statement that he attaches to his signing of the bill, saying, I'm going to follow those parts, basically, I'm going to follow those parts of the bill that I think are constitutional because I'm the commander-in-chief. And this is where he's used the words unitary executive many times. And this is a power grab. Although the signing statements have not been officially recognized by the courts as legislative history when they're trying to interpret a statute, the phrase unitary executive has cropped up, at least by Clarence Thomas in his dissent in the Hamdi versus Rumsfeld case, where he talked about the structural advantages of the unitary executive. That was the case where Sandra Day O'Connor said that war is not a blank check for the president. And certainly we know that Alito favors the unitary executive, and I would be surprised if Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Scalia did not also favor it, which is quite interesting because they are in the judicial branch.
So, Marjorie, let me ask you something here. So, if he does exercise this directive, does that mean that he can even override the Supreme Court?
Well, the Supreme Court is the top of the judicial branch, and the way I read this presidential directive, if there is some kind of a catastrophic emergency or catastrophic event, Bush is in charge, the president's in charge, and that means above and beyond the other two branches, which include the judicial branch. I wonder what he's setting up with this. I mean, what if, heaven forbid, some sort of catastrophic event were to occur just before the 2008 elections? Theoretically, Bush could use this directive to try to suspend the election, and his administration has gone to such great lengths to stay in Iraq. It's built huge permanent military bases, the biggest U.S. embassy in the world in Baghdad, and the top of the agenda for these so-called benchmarks for Iraqi compliance in order for us to pull out, both on Bush's agenda and the Iraq Study Group and Congress as well, is that the Iraqis pass an oil law. And the oil law that Bush is favoring would put the control of 75% of Iraq's oil in the hands of foreign corporations. So that's really what this is all about. It's all about the permanent military bases and control over Iraq's oil. And so, given the lengths to which he and Cheney have gone, sacrificing well over 3,000 of our men and women and in tens of thousands of Iraqis, Bush and Cheney may just be unwilling to relinquish power to a successor administration. I mean, people have talked about martial law.
But Professor Cohn, I've looked at your credentials, and you are more than capable of speaking on this subject, but do you really think that it would come a day when we have a dictatorship in this country, that we would have one man that has all the powers, and you think that George Bush could let's say, delay the 2008 elections? Do you really, with your credentials, I mean, this is not like a political commentator somewhere in China speaking about this. This is a legal expert speaking about this. Do you really think that this could happen?
Well, I hope not, and I hope that the military would not obey the order to shut down the elections, and that the people would take to the streets and wouldn't allow it. But if you look at other things he's done, the John Warner Defense Authorization Act, where and Congress agreed with him. Congress, of course, has rolled over and over. They gave him the Patriot Act. They gave him the Iraq War. They gave him the Military Commissions Act. They really have rolled over. The John Warner Defense Authorization Act passed last year would give the power of the president power to control the state National Guard, even over the objection of the governors of those states. This is a revision of the Posse Comitatus Act, and John Yoo said in October 23, 2001, that he thought that the Posse Comitatus Act, the way it was even then, would not forbid the use of military force for the military purpose of preventing and deterring terrorism.
Marjorie, last week I had Jerome Corsi here, and I asked him this question. We're talking about the same subject. And I asked him, where was our Congress when this took place, and where was our media when this took place? And the only answer, he said, that they were asleep. Now, I can't really, accept this answer. So can you tell me what happened to our Congress? Why would they let something like this happen without a fight?
Well, before I answer that, let me tell you what else they did. They passed the Military Commissions Act, and it strips habeas corpus from non-citizens, which is terrible and does a lot of other bad things. But one of the things it does that nobody talks about is that it provides a basis for the president to round up U.S. citizens that he names unlawful enemy combatants. And Kellogg, Brown & Root, of course we know that's a subsidiary of Cheney's Halliburton, is constructing a huge facility in an undisclosed location to hold tens of thousands of undesirables. So, Congress is going along with this stuff. And why? Well, that's a really good question. It goes back to September 11th, which, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I think that the Bush administration, the signs were there, and they, for various reasons, did not heed the signs. I don't think they planned it themselves, but it certainly fell into their laps, and it was a real boon. I hate to say that, but it was a boon to the Bush agenda, because ever since September 11th, every time anyone disagrees with Bush, he pulls out the 9/11 flag and waves it and talks about terrorism and how, you have to watch what you say and watch what you do. And I think he has successfully kept Congress in fear and in terror of losing their jobs and of being called soft on terror if they don't go along with him. The majority of the American people see through it. They're against the Iraq War. They don't think that Bush is really doing the job. But Congress is still terrified. I mean, you had the Democrats who stood up to him on this Iraq funding, but then they backed down. If the Republicans were in charge of Congress and the shoe was on the other foot, they never would have let that come up for a vote and pass that Iraq funding without a timetable if the shoe was on the other foot. And so I see the Democrats subpoenaing, holding some hearings, but I want to really see them hold the Bush administration's feet to the fire on this. I talk about this in my book, Cowboy Republic. And we'll see. Time will tell. But I think that for whatever reason, Congress has been terrorized by the Bush administration ever since 9/11, and they have just rolled over and capitulated every time he says jump and they say how high.
Okay. Now, are we choosing our own, or picking and choosing our own terrorists? There we have some terrorists that we like and some terrorists that we don't like. You've talked about in one of your articles about Luis Posada Carriles. Can you tell us who this guy is?
Yes, Luis Posada Carriles is a Cuban terrorist. He no longer lives in Cuba, hasn't for many, many years. FBI, recently classified FBI and CIA documents show that Posada was the mastermind of the first in-air terrorist bombing of a commercial airliner in 1976, the Cubana airliner, which killed 73 civilians, 73 innocent people. And he also has been implicated in several hotel bombings. One killed an Italian citizen in Havana. His terrorism is aimed against Cuba. And so he was on trial for this terrorist airliner bombing, very much like the 9/11 bombings, explosions, and terrorist attacks. And he escaped from a Venezuelan prison. And shortly thereafter, the CIA had him enmeshed in helping them with the illegal Iran-Contra deal. Posada has been on the CIA payroll since 1961. That is undisputed. The CIA claims that his service for the CIA ended in 1976, but Posada, in a recent court filing, said that it continued for 25 years. And either way, that would put him probably on the CIA payroll at the time of this terrorist in-air bombing. Now, so after September 11th, the Security Council, at the behest of the United States and other countries, passed two resolutions. One was 1373, and that mandates that all countries should cooperate with each other and help to bring terrorists to justice. This Luis Posada Carriles has been walking around free in the United States. He came in illegally in 2005, and instead of charging him with terrorism, which the Bush administration should have done under 1373, or extradited him back to Venezuela for trial, as 3 treaties we are party to require, they charged him with perjury, lying to immigration officials. It was a fairly minor charge. And while this case was pending and before it went to trial, Posada filed a court document saying he'd been on the CIA payroll for 25 years after 1961 and that he thought it was relevant in his case, which meant that if that case went to trial, he would blow the whistle on the dirty deeds of the CIA during the time that George H.W. Bush was director of the CIA, and they just couldn't have that. So they not only let this day, and he's been called the Osama bin Laden of the Western Hemisphere, and rightly so. But not only did they release him on bail, so he was walking around free, but the U.S. District Court Judge Kathleen Cambone in Texas dismissed the case using very strong language about how outrageous the government conduct was. And she was talking about the use of interpreters. And she was talking about the use of immigration hearings to gather evidence in criminal cases, which is done all the time. And so now There is a grand jury investigation going on in New Jersey about his implication in that hotel bombing that killed the Italian tourist, but he's basically walking around free. And so when George W. Bush talks about fighting terrorism, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. It's basically the terrorists that don't agree with his political agenda, but he is not. He's really hypocritical in this particular case, letting Luis Posada Carriles walk around free when he has been involved in so much real terrorism.
Okay. Now, what is going on in Guantanamo Bay? I know you don't like that place and you think we should not be having these people there. What's going on there?
Well, what's going on is a lot of things are going on there. They've since January of 2002, the Bush administration has held more than 750 men and boys, most of them without charges, criminal charges, like animals in little cages. Over 200 of them have been engaged in a hunger strike. And so in order to prevent any embarrassment to the Bush administration when some of them succeed in killing themselves, and 3 of them have, it's very embarrassing to the Bush administration. They force-feed them with the assistance of doctors in violation of American Medical Association ethics. And what they do is they force a huge plastic tube down their throats with no sterilization and no anesthesia, and they reuse tubes on other inmates with the blood and bile on them. There have been sworn documents in federal court. Julia Tarver, a lawyer for some of these detainees, has filed them documenting this, and it's excruciating, and the UN Human Rights Commission has called it torture. So that's what they're doing. Now, they're also trying to bring a few of these men to trial under the military, in the military commissions. These are kangaroo courts that Bush set up to try the worst of the worst. The worst al-Qaeda leaders, the worst terrorists. So let's look at the 3 that have come before the military commissions. Well, the first was David Hicks. He was an Australian, and he was allowed to plead guilty and go back to Australia. He got 8 months in jail, which is like a misdemeanor sentence. What? On the condition that he not talk about how he was tortured and he not file a lawsuit against the Bush administration. That's the first horribly dangerous terrorist. The second was Hamdan, Salim Ahmed Hamdan, who was Osama bin Laden's driver. Also not a high official in al-Qaeda, but he was Osama bin Laden's driver. And his case had been overturned by the Supreme Court last year because the initial military commissions that Bush set up, the Supreme Court thought violated the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the Geneva Conventions. And then the third is a kid, Omar Khadr, who was 15 years old when he arrived at Guantanamo. And Omar Khadr's family was allegedly connected with al-Qaeda. He was in a compound in Afghanistan with his family when the U.S. sent some Afghans into the compound. They were killed by the people inside the compound, and they began firing at the U.S. soldiers, and then the Americans dropped 2 500-pound bombs on the compound, killing everyone except this kid, Khadr. And Khadr threw a hand grenade out of this building that was being attacked. It killed an American, and then the soldiers shot him and blinded him and seriously wounded him and didn't give him medical attention and tortured him in horrible ways. I described this in my article on my website, MarjorieCohn.com. It's called No Unlawful Enemy Combatants at Guantanamo. And so they're bringing him as if he was a dangerous terrorist. These are the 3 they've brought before the military commissions. Well, what happened was that the Bush administration messed up when they wrote the Military Commissions Act and when they set this procedure for determining. Military commissions are for trying people for war crimes. It's a criminal tribunal. But the combatant status review tribunals are even worse kangaroo courts at Guantanamo, and they are to determine whether somebody's an enemy combatant and can continue to be held. And in these combatant status review tribunals, there's no right to a lawyer. You have a right to a personal representative who can tell the government everything you say. You can't even call witnesses or bring evidence. They're just a joke. But the mistake that the Bush administration made was that when they set up these combatant status review tribunals, they're only determining whether someone's an enemy combatant, not whether they're an unlawful enemy combatant. An enemy combatant could be lawful or unlawful. If they're lawful, they're prisoners of war. And if they're unlawful, they still have to be treated humanely under the Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions, according to the Supreme Court. So the military commissions only have jurisdiction over unlawful enemy combatants. And since there is no one at Guantanamo who has been declared an unlawful enemy combatant by these combatant status review tribunals, the Military Commissions Act doesn't have jurisdiction. Military commissions don't have jurisdiction over anyone at Guantanamo. So 2 different military judges 2 weeks ago dismissed the charges against both Hamdan and Omar Khadr. And now the Bush administration is in a pickle trying to decide what to do.
Okay. Marjorie, I have a question from our audience here in the studio, and also we had some people holding online, and just ask you to call back if I think we took a long time. They were on hold for a while, and then they gave up. But we will take your phone calls now. The number is 337-232-4434. Please call us back. The question here is saying that during World War II, did the citizens, were they ordered to work for the war effort during World War II? Do you know anything about that?
Were the citizens ordered to work for the war effort?
Yes.
You know, I don't know. I think there were people, for example, conscientious objectors and other people who were eligible for military service who worked in non-combatant positions. But in terms of actually requiring other people not eligible for military service to work for the war effort, I really don't know about that.
Okay. Let's go to the phones. Go ahead, Freedom.
Yes, I would like to ask Professor Cohn a question. There seemed to be, Professor Cohn, a rumor going around, ABC News and right-wing talk radio is talking about the Al-Qaeda members who supposedly are coming over the border now in order to do suicide bombings. Is this a possibility? Since no one else is reporting this besides ABC News and the right-wing radio, like Michael Savage program, for example, is it possible that the administration is floating this to ABC News in order so that George Bush can use his national security designation now, NPSD 51, plus his homeland security powers, to finally take complete control of this country? Is it possible that this is just a ploy again? And thanks very much, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had not heard that. Certainly it's possible. Keep in mind that this whole immigration debate, which is really being used as a political football, I think in a very racist way, when you have these people who have been here for many, many years, doing work that American companies need, and bringing their families here, the overwhelming majority law-abiding citizens, and yet the being used as a military football, a political football in the Congress, and I think in a very racist way. And they talk about, we've got to secure the border, we've got to build a big fence and keep the terrorists out. Well, as a matter of fact, the 9/11 hijackers didn't come over the Mexican border. They came in legally. And so I think that hyping this terror alert, you turn on Fox News and even CNN, and it's elevated all the time, and everybody's on edge, or at least they're trying to keep them on edge, is a way for Bush to promote his agenda and maintain power. And, of course, that agenda is amassing all power in his hands, continuing an illegal, unnecessary, immoral, deadly war in Iraq. And there's also a dispute in the administration between Cheney and Condoleezza Rice about whether to attack Iran. But when there is, and if you look at the timing of many of the events, when Bush wants to try to push something through, he usually divulges, he's done this a number of times, I talk about it in my book, he'll divulge some kind of a terrorist plot, which turns out usually not to be such a plot, and to try to hype the terror among the people. So I don't know. I haven't heard that.
Well, let me just to kind of ask his question in a different way. How many people do you think a year cross that border?
I don't have the statistics. Many people.
1 million?
Are you talking legally or illegally?
Illegally.
I don't know.
Okay, but I mean thousands. If we want to put the figure at a low figure, why we haven't seen any of these Al Qaeda? Supposedly we are in war with them, and definitely the way the border is, somebody, some of these people could have, but we haven't seen anything. So does that mean that we don't have any terrorists out there who mean us harm?
If these Al Qaeda hijackers came in legally, they were
right. No, I understand that, but my point is, if they wanted to send somebody, they would have sent somebody a long time ago.
Yes, exactly, and yeah, I mean, if you want to look for Al Qaeda, there was no Al Qaeda operating in Iraq at all. Regardless of what Cheney continues to say, there's no link at all between Iraq and Al Qaeda until we went in there and created a horrible war and occupation. And now there is terrorism going on there, although I think the foreign fighters are a tiny minority compared to the resistance of the people there, resistance to the foreign occupation.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Now, Marjorie, if I just want to go back to the immigration thing, this wasn't even on my agenda to ask you, but I just wanted your opinion. I understand you talked positively about people who are crossing here and they wanted to do work that Americans don't want to do, and they're law-abiding citizens and they're good for the economy. Now, do you think it's okay for people just to cross over the border and come over to the United States?
Well, it's interesting because Bush is kind of, there's a contradiction in Bush's policy here. Bush knows that his friends in the corporations want this cheap labor. So they want them to come up. They actually want them to come over here because they will do work that Americans won't do. But then they want to separate them from their families. They don't want to give them benefits. They want to send them back whenever they feel like it, even though many of them have been here for many, many years. It's a very inhumane position and policy that they've taken. And my feeling is that these people who have been here for many, many years, who have not been involved in criminal activity, who have been contributing to the economy, should be allowed to become naturalized citizens.
Now, didn't Clinton did this before, where there was about 11 million people actually got amnesty during Clinton era?
He did. He had a plan. It did that partially. But
and now we're talking about another 14 or 15 million. So when does it end?
I think it's 11 or 12 million we're talking about. But these are not. It's not just a statistic. These are human beings. They have families.
No. I mean, I understand that. But we have a whole world full of poor people who we need to take care of. I'm just asking, if this goes on and these 14 million or 12 million or even 10 million, if we say, okay, let's go ahead and do it now, would that be the end of this? Or 5 years from now we would be given amnesty to another 15 million?
Well, they're here anyway. The question is, do we want to keep them driving without licenses because they can't get licenses and living in the shadows or not? I mean, it's important to look at why they come here. They don't cross that border and take their life into their hands. It's very, very dangerous. They have to go through mountains, there are people at the border that rob them.
I understand all that, Marjorie, but there are hundreds of millions of people.
I'm trying to answer your question.
Okay, go ahead.
I think you cannot just deal with the symptom, you have to deal with the sickness. And that is, why do they come over here? They come over here because things are very, very bad in Mexico. Why are things bad in Mexico? The NAFTA, which was pushed by the United States, has been very, very detrimental to working people. And Bush's neoliberal policies have also hurt the economy so that there are not jobs there for the people and they have to come here. So in a way, it's the fault of the United States to a large extent that they have to come over here to earn a living, to be able to support their families. And so if you really want to deal with the problem, you deal with this so-called free trade, which is not fair trade, which Bush is trying to impose on other countries and has not been successful in other parts of Latin America, fortunately, in my opinion. But deal with the root of the problem, because they wouldn't be coming over here if they could earn a decent living if their economy were not being adversely influenced by U.S. policies.
Okay, but there are hundreds of millions of people throughout the world that are probably being affected by U.S. policies. There are hundreds of millions of people in Asia, in Africa, who, due to the U.S. policies over many, many years, are poor. So does that My question is, where does it end? Do we take another 50 million? Do we take another 100 million?
Well, I'll tell you where it ends, okay? If you really want to deal with the problem, you look at where the money is going, where our money is going. Where is it going? It's going to the military. It's going to the defense contractors, and we're talking $1 or $2 trillion. We're not just talking millions or billions of dollars. If that money were spent to really help people, to prop up infrastructure, to give people aid, and to help governments, not corrupt governments, but governments that are really serving the people, then we wouldn't have this problem. But it means totally reorienting the political and economic and social priorities of this country. And I don't know that that's going to happen either in a Republican or a Democratic administration. I mean, many of the Democrats are also beholden to corporations for their funding. We're talking about fundamental change here.
You know, I'm thinking when you said $1 trillion will take care of the problems, I'm thinking about the $120 billion that Congress just gave George Bush for the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, that if we spent that same money on Iraq and Afghanistan, we'll probably solve all their problems.
Of course, instead of killing them and maiming and wounding them and killing our own people.
Right.
It's counterintuitive. It does not make sense if you step back and look at it. It just doesn't make sense.
Now, with the few minutes that we have left, and I really appreciate you staying with us this long, with Alberto Gonzales and the U.S. attorneys, I always hear that these U.S. attorneys serve at the pleasure of the president. What does that mean?
Well, it means that when a new administration comes in, usually they appoint their own U.S. attorneys, and that's fine, and that's acceptable, and Clinton did it, and other presidents have done it as well. But what's happened with the U.S. attorney scandal, which is growing like an amoeba every day, there has been basically, what should I say?
Politically motivated?
Well, yeah, no, but it's been a plan. There's been a very concerted plan by the Bush administration to target U.S. attorneys who refuse to be what I think Kyle Sampson called loyal Bushies. And that means to do what they are told to do politically, even though U.S. attorneys are prosecutors. And prosecutors, according to the Supreme Court's long-standing jurisprudence, the prosecutor's job is to see that justice is done. They are not supposed to be, even though they were appointed by a political administration, they're not supposed to be political. They're officers of the court, they're prosecutors. And so if you look at these people who have been targeted and who were forced to resign by the Bush administration, many of them refused to pursue what they thought were frivolous lawsuits that the Bush administration wanted to attack Democrats for so-called voter fraud. I mean, Karl Rove is really intent on fixing the elections. That's really what this is all about. And also some of them who were fired or forced to resign had filed lawsuits against Republicans. For example, Randy Duke Cunningham from San Diego, who is in state prison, is in federal prison for many years now for corruption and fraud. So the problem is that they have been used in a political way, and that's what's so objectionable about it.
So, I mean, I'm looking at some of the names that you have put in your article, like David Iglesias from Albuquerque, who refused to bring up charges against some Republicans. Then Carol Lam, what you just mentioned, her investigation sent Randy Cunningham, for taking over $2 million. He's a Republican. Bud Cummins also something to do with Timothy Griffin, I believe. No, he was replaced by Timothy Griffin. So all these people have basically either refused to do what Republicans told them, or they prosecuted Republicans politicians.
Right. And the latest to come out in today's McClatchy newspapers is that Hans von Spakovsky, a former Justice Department official, political appointee, actually blocked career lawyers from filing at least 3 lawsuits charging governments with violating voting rights of African Americans and other minorities. And so it's still coming out, this corruption, and it's really quite disturbing.
So who's supposed to be over all these abuses of powers? Is that Congress? Is it the Supreme Court? Who's supposed to be watching this?
Well, certainly Congress is supposed to be watching, and if the cases get up to the Supreme Court, then, if a case came before the Supreme Court would decide to rule on it or not.
But now, Marjorie, Congress is not going to do it because we have seen Congress not doing a lot of things that Congress is supposed to do.
Right, but they are holding hearings and they are subpoenaing. Alberto Gonzales Alberto Gonzales serves at the pleasure of the president, but under the Constitution, the president, vice president, and government officials could be impeached. So it is possible, theoretically, that Alberto Gonzales could be impeached. The problem is that impeachment starts in the House of Representatives, as we know. Remember Bill Clinton? It's like bringing a charge. Impeachment is not a conviction. Impeachment is more like a prosecution. So they're impeached in the House of Representatives, which Bill Clinton was, for something much more serious than starting an illegal war, and that was lying about sex. And then it went to the Senate for trial, and he was acquitted. But Nancy Pelosi and John Conyers said when they came into office that impeachment was off the table. Now, I'm hoping, and I put this in my book as well, that if Congress continues to subpoena witnesses and documents, not just for the U.S. Attorney scandal, but for the run-up to Iraq, the illegal domestic spying program, and a number of other illegal things that the Bush administration is doing, and the Bush administration continues to stonewall, that Congress will get so upset that it might consider initiating impeachment. But now, of course, they're getting all hyped up about the presidential election. They are still holding hearings, and so I'm hopeful. But it remains to be seen whether they're really going to stop it. There was a no-confidence vote on Alberto Gonzales, a symbolic vote that lost. And I thought the interesting thing was they didn't have 60 votes, which is what they needed. But I thought the interesting thing was that not one Republican said anything nice about Alberto Gonzales. They just said, "Oh, we shouldn't talk about this; it's a waste of time." But nobody got up on the Senate floor and said that Alberto Gonzales was a worthy Attorney General, and that really says volumes.
Okay. Now, there are talks out there to impeach the president himself, but I haven't really seen anything materialized. Dennis
Kucinich introduced 3 articles of impeachment against Dick Cheney. But
I mean, even if we start the procedure on that, you think we'll be finished with that before 2 years are over with, or not even 2 years now?
That's the problem. We don't have a lot of time, and I don't know that that Congress wants to spend its time in impeachment hearings, but certainly they should be holding the hearings, which they are holding, on the U.S. Attorney scandal and on some of these other issues. And, it's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, the corruption and the illegality by the Bush administration, it comes out every day. Every day there are new revelations. And it's, you just wonder when you wake up in the morning and go get the paper what you're going to see next. But it's really pretty astounding that he's been able to get away with breaking the law as long as he has.
Now, do you have any predictions on presidential contenders, Republicans or Democrats?
I don't, but I'll tell you who I would love to see running for president, and that's Al Gore. I think that he would be terrific. I know he's not running yet, or if he ever will be, but he really talks about things that need to be talked about. He is he's not acting in a political way the way the other ones are. He's not holding his finger up to the wind to decide what's popular. And he's talking about real issues. He's talking about political power. He's talking about the Iraq War and really getting out. He's talking about global warming. I think he'd be terrific.
Now, what do you think of Scooter Libby? It's becoming more of a his conviction. The Republicans are kind of competing of who is going to protect him more. I've heard where people saying this was wrong, it was mainly political, even though the guy was convicted with on a trial jury or a jury trial. And their star these days is Fred Thompson. He's saying that was wrong. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think Scooter Libby is going to either be pardoned or they're going to pull some other kind of procedural move to keep him out of prison while the appeal's pending, because he knows too much, and I am confident, at least I think, in my opinion, that Bush has made some kind of deal with him that if he keeps his mouth shut, that he'll save his hide. So I think that we can expect that at some point, and I don't know exactly when. But certainly he's a lawbreaker, and anybody else would be doing their time, but Scooter Libby could really blow the whistle on the Bush administration, and when people go to jail, they tend to get very upset.
Marjorie, last question. Is it going to be the winner? Is he going to be a Republican or a Democrat?
I have no idea.
Do you have any gut feelings?
No, I really don't, although I understand in the most recent poll that independents won't vote for Hillary Clinton. I think that, certainly I would support any Democrat who was running, but I think that she would be a disaster. She is in favor of continued occupation in Iraq. She wants to keep a considerable presence. She's not talking about getting rid of the bases. And that to me is the litmus test issue. I have seen her, really not taking a courageous stand on that, not doing the right thing, and I think she'd be very, very bad. And I think she'd have trouble being elected as well. She's very polarizing.
Very good, Professor. Thank you very much for coming on the program, and I really appreciate you giving us the time to speak with us. Thanks again.
My pleasure, Hesham.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Marjorie Cohn, and interesting opinion on what is going on in the country. I'm sure you will not hear such analysis on mainstream TV, as they will not even give people like Professor Cohen the time to really speak. They put her on for 3 seconds and thank you very much, goodbye, and then they will have 10 other neocons to tell you all day long of who the good guy is, and also 24 hours a day with these talk shows who are telling you that everything is peachy. And of course it is far from it. It is we're doing bad, ladies and gentlemen, all over. We're doing bad right here in the country. We're doing a lot of wrong things. We're doing bad in the world. We said we want to bring democracy to the Middle East. Instead, we brought these people nothing but death and misery. And that's exactly what we brought there. We involved ourselves with Israel, who has a problem with her Arab neighbors, and finally bringing us to take care of that problem for her. And I might add, succeeded very well. I'll tell you what, we have a minute left. Let's go to Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, hi. Your last guest, a couple of things that she said troubled me. She said that she thought that Gore would be a good candidate, but I remember when he debated Bush that he didn't do very well. And if you can't out-debate Bush, I think you have problems, number one. And number two, I think that Hillary is beholden to some people with a lot of money up in New York. I think a part of it is the pro-Israel lobby, and
definitely.
She has her finger in the wind too much.
Let me tell you, there's two people that I would like to see as president and vice president, and I don't care who gets what. They're in two different parties, Ron Paul of Texas and Dennis Kucinich of Ohio. These two people, if we still have the system where you can see the vice presidency, it did not used to be both on the same ticket. We had before, it used to be you had to run for the office of vice president separately. So we did have where the president was a Republican and the vice president was a Democrat. That was changed where you will have a ticket for both president and vice president. But those two are probably the only two politicians in the United States that are being honest with the people and have answers to our problems.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Dennis Kucinich, because I like him because I believe he's the only one that's telling, well, at least the semblance of truth. But I wanted to make one comment and then I'll let you go.
Tom, we're completely out of time. I'm very sorry.
Oh, okay.
will call in the next hour, and I'll be more than happy to talk to you. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in 4 minutes. Don't go too far.
Thank you.